Hey listeners, this is Alex, your host of UOA Entrepreneurs of Asia. After more than a decade of venture building, bootstrapping, and scaling, and now investing in Southeast Asia, I sit down with founders, investors, and entrepreneurs who can share their hard-earned lessons and stories for the benefit of the Asia ecosystem and beyond. This episode was recorded at the end of 2021 with my good friend Pei Fu, founder and CEO of Karbon Card, a new age corporate bank that helps new and old companies get new bank accounts in minutes, multiple credit cards, and modern financial tools to help grow their business. Since the recording, Karbon Card has gone to raise a Series A of 15 million USD in February of 2022, right on the heels of a Y Combinator-led seed round of 12 million USD that this episode discusses from the end of last year. This episode profiles Pei Fu in the first half. If you want to know what a rocket internet venture capitalist Y Combinator founder looks like, you've come to the right place. Pei Fu has an extremely diverse background, and he's one of the most deliberate thinkers I know in my circles. There's a lot to learn from his background, especially for those examining early stage opportunities to build or invest in. Aside from his background, we also cover Pei Fu's guiding principles for his personal and professional life. To fully grasp it, you will need to listen carefully and tease it out. Towards the end, we discuss what exactly is Karbon Card and what problems he's solving for the India ecosystem. We also go quite deep into what it means to be a great venture capitalist regardless of what region you are from, and the pros and cons from investing versus building as a founder. If you're ready to learn, let's dive in and listen. Pei Fu, my brother, welcome to the show. I'm so happy to have you.
Good to see you again, Alex.
And you're calling from, where are you calling from today?
Shanghai.
Okay, so you're still in China. How is the situation in China?
It's pretty well controlled, I would say. So China had 2 months of very strict lockdown at the beginning of last year, and then after that, the focus has been, quarantine anyone coming into the country. But pretty much people in the country are free to move about. We just gotta wear masks when we're on the subway or public transits, and enter some buildings. But that's about it.
Okay, so it's life is pretty normal though, like no restrictions. People are just doing the normal stuff, and then if there's crowds, you just wear masks and no problems.
Yep. Most there are some scares here and there, but then the government is very very draconian in the sense that they can come knocking on your door at 4 a.m. with like 3 people fully suited and doing a check on you, and you're not allowed to leave until you're tested negative.
Interesting.
So
interesting, and that's pretty effective.
Yeah, so they track you down. So if you take a DD, and because your driver has been tested positive, you're considered second degree or third degree. They will track down everyone who is a second degree and third degree, and then see if that issue needs to be further expanded, right? But it's quite effective. Not much liberty to say, but.
But personally, does that affect how you feel? It doesn't matter. It's just a small thing, or it's just like it's better if they didn't do that.
I actually think it's good that
but better for society.
I think overall the society benefits because the government is doing this. Yeah. Otherwise, if it's a free for all, then people just kind of it's difficult for people to contain themselves, right? And you need the government to step in here.
All right. So before we begin, I want to talk a little bit about your background. We also had some of our mutual friends who are interested to learn some stuff about you too. So I hope you don't mind.
Sure.
I know that you were born in Taiwan, correct? Yeah, but you also spent time in Thailand. So what was the situation there? What was happening with the family, and what was the background?
Right. So when I was 10, my family basically moved the entire. Basically, I moved everyone from Taiwan to Thailand, and that was back in 1990. And there are 2 reasons. One is that they didn't want my older brother, and myself to serve in the military in Taiwan. So we had to leave before he turned 15. And secondly, the opportunity economically was quite decent in those days in Southeast Asia, and Thailand was one of them. So actually, a lot of Taiwanese, let's say, businessmen moved to Southeast Asia during that period. So then spent about 15 years in Thailand altogether. Went to university there, and then had my first job with a PE fund called Lombard Investments in Bangkok, investing in late stage Thai companies for about 2 years. Then after that, my family decided to move to China because China was booming at that time. That was back in 2004 when China joined WTO and the economy was just taking off. We felt that there's a lot of opportunities to be in China. So again, we moved from Thailand to China, and basically, ever since then, I've kind of been coming back and forth between China and other places. So when I first got to China, it was pretty early on, and I basically wanted to try my hands at venture capital, given that similar to what I did before in Bangkok with private equity. And so at that time, I joined Kleiner Perkins in 2006, and basically spent about 4 years investing in tech in China. And those are really early days, right? Those early days like Focus Media, Baidu, Alibaba, those are the big companies back then. Xinlang and Sohu, these are the companies. So a lot of these are not that, I would say, powerful anymore. But these are kind of the let's say, first generation tech companies, internet companies in China.
It's interesting you say that. I mean, I don't want to go off on too much on a tangent, but a giant search engine like Baidu is still not as powerful. Is it not like a Google or?
Yeah, it's not like a Google at all, I would say. First, Google is global, and they're they're more than just a search engine nowadays. Baidu kind of fell off the top tier tech companies in China because there are players like ByteDance, and also because in the past, when you think about information flow, most people would access Baidu as a portal to get information, right? Yeah. And before that, before Baidu, was actually the like Yahoo and Xinlang, these kind of portals, right? So it'd be portals, and then Baidu as search engine. But nowadays, there are so many different channels and platforms you can go and get their information. Not just Baidu. So there's ByteDance, there's TikTok, there's different portals, and all kinds of channels. So Baidu didn't really capture all of that. So now they're kind of they're still, of course, they're still doing very well, but they're not like the BAT before is not the BAT today.
Yeah. Okay. So I have a few more questions about the background. So it sounds like your family was pretty entrepreneurial. Is it just your family's business people? Do you have family business, or is that also part of why you wanted to do the business side of things? Going to your early career, or what was that about?
Yeah, I definitely think they're very entrepreneurial. We tried our hand at all kinds of business. We had I'm not sure if you know, we actually had a bee farm, like raising
a bee farm. Wow.
In Chiang Mai, Thailand. So we
nice.
Okay. And we were into plastics. We were into like plastic manufacturing machines.
Plastics was when you guys moved from Thailand to China under in Jiangsu, NJ Plastics.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
So because of that business, we said, okay, why don't we do this in China?
I think it was interesting.
But I would definitely say that they have a very entrepreneurial spirit, and I think since childhood we used to live in a factory where you have the plants right outside where the machines are humming, and then me and my brothers would be living in the quarter right next to it. Like we can see the machine.
Like the factory workers.
Yeah, pretty much like that. Like we can see.
Yeah, that's exactly how it's set up.
It is so that we can. if something's wrong, you can say, hey, something's wrong. Go and check it out. You see,
That is real entrepreneurship right there.
extra
Right?
pair of eyes, right? And so constantly the machine will be humming, and we we have 3 rooms. One is where we slept. One is the office. One is where, say, the kitchen or something. So definitely good times, I would say. Good experience.
And how many languages do you speak?
So I would say Mandarin, English, Thai. Taiwanese is a dialect, not quite a language. Learn a bit of Japanese, and a little bit of Bahasa, and it's
Still okay.
getting very rusty though. But
yeah. Okay, it's not too bad. And then one question that some of our friends had was, I don't know if you want to go too vulnerable. It's up to you if you want to share. I'll leave it to you. You got married pretty early, right? And I don't know if you want to share that experience, but they're kind of curious about your life philosophy. Like, you had some events that changed your life and how you want to choose to live. Would you share about your life philosophy and how that came about? Or
sure, I think philosophy is definitely too big of a word. I'm not sure this is called a philosophy, but I would say that I have a bit of a guiding principle that if things make sense and people are happy and you're happy, then you should make it happen. If things were to repeat itself, I would have done the same thing in a heartbeat, right? But then some things don't turn out as well as expected or as you expected at all, and it ended up being better for everyone for a certain path to be followed, and then I guess that makes sense, right?
that applies on a personal level. Do you think that also overlaps in the world, like career wise and work wise?
I think so. I think it's difficult to see, of course, how a decision will impact you down the road or way down the road. Perhaps a mistake that you thought you made ended up being the one that will ultimately help you win or succeed in aspects. And those are things you cannot see. But I would say to kind of reduce the anxiety you have for yourself when you worry too much about the future or think too much about the past, you want to have a set of principles where you feel comfortable with, and you're ready to deal with any kind of consequences that come because of that guiding principle. Now, of course, you can tweak as you go, right? But then if you've decided that you would take A because of these reasons, then if A turns out to be bad, you should not just complain. You should think about how do you revise your guiding principle if needed. But maybe you knew that there was going to be a certain element of chance or risk when you took A, but then based on your principles, you thought that was the best option. If you were to do it again, that will probably happen again, right? You pick A again. But it doesn't mean it's the wrong decision or anything. Maybe B, C, D would be even worse, right? You never know, right? So I think a lot of people like to maybe think a little too much about the future,
overthink it,
and that I think will just seem to add to unnecessary stress and anxiety, which doesn't help you perform well.
It seems almost very pragmatic, and it also seems very logical way to kind of go about it. How much of this do you think is more of you trying to justify kind of what happened in the past versus it being an actual logical conclusion of how to live?
Well, I don't think I definitely don't think the justification for anything, right? I don't think justification is required. Because you asked me about philosophy, I'm just I'm just sharing kind of my thinking process of why I would choose A over B and the reasoning behind it. Now, many people are different, right? Some people are more emotional, some people are more rational, so on and so forth, right? So we all have a way of um, making decisions. And wherever we are today, it is simple accumulation of all the decisions we've made in the past. And some people are perfectly happy doing whatever they're doing, right? Some people are not. And
no point to overcomplicate it.
Yeah, I think understand what drives you, have some simple rules, and just stick with it.
Yep. And so also very briefly, just so people get a better idea of where, kind of where you're coming from, you had the family business in China, then you did Kleiner Perkins in 2006, 2010 during the clean tech era, which is a very interesting period of time. I think our old boss, Dennis Wang, was also doing private equity in clean tech at the same time. McKinsey for less than a year. What happened to McKinsey? Why didn't you stick around for longer?
So McKinsey was more of a, I would say, an experiment. I went there during my when I was at Berkeley doing B school. So I was at McKinsey for the summer, and I at that time I was 30, and then I didn't feel that I wanted to kind of start or begin my career after B school with consulting. It would have been quite exciting for sure. And I felt that what excited me more was, say, startups and investments. Yeah, so that's kind of the. So how I think about if I have to choose as for myself, what are the 3 best jobs fresh out of university? I would say they would be like PE, VC investing, investment banking, or management consulting. The reason being that all 3 of these exposes an individual to a wide variety of different industries at different stages. And during that period, because there's so much exposure to different things, you can kind of understand each of the industries a bit better, and eventually, hopefully, land the one that you're truly passionate about, and stay, in that industry. So I think these 3 are pretty good. Now, within these 3, I would say banking and consulting are actually even better than PE and VC, because banking and consulting, they really prepare you professionally and give you a lot of training on all the hard skills with modeling, with analysis, with industry research, so on and so forth. So I think banking and consulting would, if I can pick, I would say these are the top 2 careers that I prefer at the beginning, when I can build up my hard skills. I was very lucky that when I joined the PE fund, fresh out of school, my senior or my associate, he was a superstar from Merrill Lynch. So he taught me everything. It was just me and him. I was the only analyst, the only associates. And he basically taught me everything that a banker had to do for a PE fund. So I'm still eternally grateful for his guidance and support and training. Very tough, but I learned so much there. So kind of coming back to consulting. So when I did consulting during my B school, I felt like it was more of an experience that I just see how it's like. But then after that I decided to leave, and I decided to join Rocket. Right, that's when we met and all that.
It's like it's applied consulting, I guess you could say, which is a more steroid version of actually doing the execution part, where typically in consulting you just talk about it, then go to the next client and never see or feel it. Rocket, you have to pull the spreadsheet, do it really quickly, then you go build it. So it's kind of going deeper into that direction. That being said, I guess I won't go too deep in it, but I don't know if I completely. I guess I kind of agree that you get the exposure, but there's also the moral hazard of young people not knowing what game they're playing, and then they stay in the game too long for the wrong reasons. Right? If you're going with the mindset of that knowledge beforehand, that you could take advantage and find somewhere where you want to land, because you don't know what you don't know, and these kind of jobs can give you that exposure of knowing these things. But the problem is they end up playing the game. It's all about the money. It's about being flashy, signaling on these things, and then you kind of get stuck. And then a lot of these guys don't have purpose in life beyond 2 years. They do it for 5 years, 7 years, and then it's hard. Then you get stuck in a trap. So that's guess it's if you can balance the mindset and know what you're doing it for, then I would probably agree with you.
Yep. I think you can view it as a trap, but some people view it as a heaven.
Depends what your goals are.
Right? Some people,
exactly.
They're trapped in heaven and they love it. Right? People are wired different.
Correct. That's my bias.
And I believe that again, as long as they enjoy what they were doing at that time, there's really nothing against that, right? So and people have different aspirations and potentials and plans, right? So I think everyone can share what they like, but I just find life to be very fascinating that what you hate some days may end up being what you like later, vice versa, right?
Yeah.
So you never know what will happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good point. It's more along the lines like, do you really understand what you're doing at the core level and why? And if you accept, what are the trade-offs and consequences, then it probably doesn't really matter. It's just, I guess, what I'm alluding to. Then you're right. It's my bias of saying it's a trap, but really what I'm saying is maybe you should do deeper thinking of why you're doing these jumps, right? And lots of times, the things they were doing, they didn't have fulfillment, and they were doing it for other reasons that weren't really making people happy. Because I heard that story many times from people who stayed in consulting or banking too long, and then they made something else. Like, I should have left earlier. But I think you're right. If you're a very thoughtful person and you can do a lot of homework introspection-wise, then it's probably not a problem, like you said. It's really not a big deal. You could do it for 10 years and be happy. So it's nothing wrong. So moving on, after McKinsey, you did Zalora, Easy Taxi, Groupon, which is like a 3-year rocket span. After Rocket, you did Mommy Love. Then you went back into VC under, is it 01 VC it's called, or how do you say the name?
Yeah, 01 VC.
Okay, 01 VC, and then after 01 VC, which I think what we're going to talk about first is you founded a company 2019 called Karbon Card.
Yeah.
So I believe congratulations are in order. Did you get funding from YC, or what's the situation with YC?
Right. So we're part of YC Summer 2021. The batch.
Okay.
It kind of just ended. We just had our demo day at the end of August. Nice. So it's the fourth time they're doing the batch virtually. In the past, we would have to fly in to the Bay Area for 3 to 4 months and have a boot camp conducted there, right? So this year, these 2 years, all these batches have been done kind of remotely, right? So they did invest, and along with other investors.
So huge congratulations! It's quite a achievement to have the branding stamp of Y Combinator. So I think you guys are probably on the right track. So before we move forward, why don't we tell the audience what exactly is Karbon Card? What is the problem? What's the pain point, and what are you solving?
So Karbon Card is a corporate card for companies in India. So we're only serving Indian companies, and the card essentially gives them a credit in which they can spend for up to for amount for up to 30 days, and then they will pay back the balance, and then they can spend again. So we don't charge them anything. There are no fees, no interest. We earn the money from the interchange, which is what the merchants pay when the card is swiped. So let's say if I issue a card and you swipe it on Grab, then Grab will be paying an interchange fee, and that is our income.
Yep.
So as a customer, you should be quite happy that you get a card with credit. You're not paying anything for it, and you can issue the card to different people in the company. So you can have one for your finance manager, one for yourself, one for the sales head, so on and so forth. So all of their any corporate expense, as long as you pay through this card, then there will be no need for reimbursements because the company is covering for this card, right? So the entire process of you kind of stapling the receipts and filling up the reimbursement forms, submitting it to the finance managers, and then getting paid back next month or so, that entire process is eliminated. That's essentially what a corporate card is, and we're focusing on that in India right now.
There's a few interesting points there. The first one, it actually kind of reminds me of a lot of corporate solution products. Like when we're doing Easy Taxi, we're doing Easy Taxi corporate, right? So that's you have like limits, and so it sounds like you're solving one pain point there. I'm guessing from the other side of the pain point, though, was it very hard for certain companies in India to be getting this type of credit? What was this underserved market, or what exactly was the angle when you built up this company?
The biggest pain point for Indian companies is that it's very difficult to get a card from the banks. The banks make it quite difficult. They would ask for a lot of fixed deposit first. They would ask for personal guarantee, and the process to get the card applied takes 3 months or so. We offer our card to our customers with no fixed deposit, with no guarantee. It takes about 15 minutes to apply, and the card can be issued on the same day or next day. So I would say it's relatively no friction for the customers to try our product. And this is an underserved market because banks should traditionally view, and they still view, the startups and SMEs as high risk. They don't want to extend credit to these companies unless there's fixed deposits from these companies. So I think that's our I would say wedge, in the sense that we believe we understand the startups relatively well. We are able to understand who invests in them. Is their industry supported or not by let's say by COVID, and conduct some of these basic analysis that the banks can do, of course, if they want, but they're just high risk averse and just don't want to take any risk for these startups or these SMEs, and so we are bearing the risk for any kind of default, of course. But I would say that's our angle, and that's our value prop for a lot of these startups in India.
And is the best comparable? Is it fair to say is Brex, or is it different?
Yes, it's pretty close.
Okay, so it's pretty close, and the business model it seems quite well. I don't know. It must be unique for the region. I don't know if it's unique to the Brex model. How did you come up with charging onto further down the payment stack with the merchants? Like, do you have to actually go negotiate with the banks on splitting it, or how does that actually work?
So
out?
we work with the bank to issue corporate cards, and Visa or MasterCard, they'll be the ones that work with the merchants to, let's say, process the payments and collection, right? So basically, these are things that have been done by our partners, meaning the bank and the merchant, or merchants and Visa and MasterCard.
Okay, so the way for you to grow then is to just keep on doing these kind of partnerships. Of course, acquiring the customers who need the cards, but then you have to keep on doing deals with more and more banks, or you have to only get a few of these distribution points like Visas and Masters, and you're done, or how does that work?
So we actually do all the distribution. We're the ones that go and acquire the customers. At the back end, the bank and, let's say, Visa, MasterCard, they handle the infrastructure for the card to be issued, for the card to be used and functional and all that. So we do not need to work with additional banks if we don't want to. We just need to focus on acquiring more customers. That's how we grow.
And then you talked about risk. So why are the banks partnering with you guys? Like, how are you guys thinking about risk and managing the risks? If this wasn't being solved, why are they partnering with you now? And how do you go about managing the risk?
So we underwrite the customers based on, their cash balance, their financial performance, their industry, their investors. A lot of different parameters that we use to underwrite the customers. My team is quite experienced with SME lending in India, so we understand that business relatively well. Now, the banks working with us because banks themselves are competing against one another. So we are working with one bank that wants to compete against other banks. And basically, they lend us their license, and we help them distribute. We acquire customers on their behalf. So there's that symbiotic relationship between us and the banks. Now, we're now working with the biggest banks because usually the bigger banks are quite, I would say, difficult to work with because they want to do things on their own, right? So we partner with the smaller banks.
Okay. So in the A16Z framework, people, product, market, I think the product's quite clear, right? I think you described it pretty well. It's a pain point. You know where you're focusing. The market, I'm assuming, has to be big. It's India, right? It's underserved niche. Even if it's a niche, it's probably SMEs are massive. How big is the market for Karbon Card?
There are more than 40 million SMEs in India. I think of that, perhaps 10% or so at least have a need for a card. So on a very high level, those we are 10. But we are also launching new banking products. So as we launch more banking products, more and more of those 40 million SMEs will become our target audience.
And then I think for the last piece, people, this is a very interesting one. You're Taiwanese, live significantly in Thailand, experience all over the world, worked in China a lot. It seems very unintuitive for a Chinese founder, in a sense, quote unquote, Chinese founder to operate in India. So what gave you the confidence to think that you could actually solve a problem? And how did you even end up in India? Like, why not do this in markets you're familiar with, that people are willing to fund right away, and where they kind of saw the fit? So what happened there?
So before building Karbon, I was with Run VC, like you said, right? And at that fund, my main role was to basically incubate fintech companies in different parts of the world. That include India, include Indonesia. So we basically incubate a lot of fintech companies in these two markets, and that's how I got to learn about the market in India. And when we evaluated the model for different markets, India ended up being the most favorable one. Number one, it's credit starved, so it's difficult for companies, and people alike, to get credit from anybody. Number two, the banking industry is quite fragmented. So there are hundreds of banks in India that have licenses to operate. That's not the case in China or Indonesia, where the banking industry is quite consolidated, and it's difficult to work with a bank to, say, issue corporate cards. So due to these reasons, we felt that India was a perfect market. And during the time when we were incubating fintech companies in India, we already got quite familiar with the ecosystem, with the market, and with the opportunity, basically. And I think this is a part where, I guess, the more you push yourself out of your comfort zone, the more you're comfortable with new things and new markets. So I guess because I have been exposed to different markets, Taiwan, Thailand, China, Indonesia, then India didn't sound like too much of a challenge, given that as long as you have I would say, understanding that you want to focus on what makes sense for yourself and what the market needs, then there's always a way in. It may not be immediate because it's a new market, but then given enough time, if the model's right or the team is right, the market will prove that it's right. So I think intuitively, if you say, hey, why is this Taiwanese guy who grew up in Thailand doing a fintech company in India? If you jump from there to there, then naturally it sounds very odd.
That must have happened though, right? When you were probably pitching for raising your seed round, Was that an issue?
Well, it depends on whom I'm raising the money from. So when I first started,
Yeah.
I reached out to my Chinese friends, or people who knew me and understood the model and understood the market. So it wasn't too hard. I mean, they know what I've been building in the past. They can see the potential for the business. They may not know the market so well, but given that I have built companies in other parts of the world, it wasn't too hard for them to have that leap of faith.
And how do you think about this business model across regions then? Like this, so from what I understand, if I read in between the lines, the reason why this model doesn't exist yet in Southeast Asia is because Southeast Asia is also fragmented, but with very big moats in individual countries. Right, the banks are quite consolidated in every Southeast Asian country, limited licenses. But I feel the pain point's very real still in that I know tons of SMEs who just can't get access to credit cards. Like some of the most successful guys who are going international now, 6 years in, they still can't get a credit card. So how are you thinking about this from region to region, or do you just only think about it from an India perspective for now?
I do agree that the pain is universal in the sense that banks, because they've been protected by the licenses in their moats, have made it difficult for fintechs to issue cards as they wish. So that's definitely been something that's a case for the past few decades. Now, in terms of, I guess the question you're asking is, are we thinking about expanding beyond India, say into markets like Southeast Asia? There's always a possibility. I think it's more about the bandwidth and also how much opportunity we do see in India in itself. Plus the uncertainty brought forth by COVID, so on and so forth, right? So it's a pretty complicated situation. And so I would say that for now, we're quite focused on India. And we do see a lot of potentials, emerging as well. Not just with cards, but also with other banking services. So yeah, I think right now we're not thinking too much about it, and are focused solely on India. But it's hard to say what will happen in the future.
Yeah. Well, it seems like at this current stage, you guys have to be extremely product focused, right? There's probably a lot of back-end infrastructure to support this if you want to scale it properly, right? So I would imagine tech being a very heavy part of the business that you need to invest in. Is that correct?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's, I guess, fundamentally what differentiates a tech startup from a traditional company.
Yep.
In that you have a product and that can scale.
Okay, so the other comparables are much more mature, and I think it's probably similar to what we said, that they've already built up the infrastructure. Do you see Karbon Card unfolding very differently as a product for the Indian market versus, say, like what we see in the Americas? Does it become like more of a neobank, or does this become like a feature that a bank acquires, or how do you think about it?
I think there are most of the U.S. players are becoming like, let's call them financial operating systems. Not only are they offering corporate cards, but they're moving to expense management, moving to different kinds of SaaS tools like account receivable management, accounting software, so on and so forth. And I think that makes sense in the U.S. because labor is more expensive there, and companies value these features. But then in India, labor is quite cheap. So mostly companies simply hire more people to solve these problems. So we have some light, I would say, expense management features that help our customers out. We're not charging for it, but for now we're focused more on just building out the corporate card, because that in itself it's big enough, and we want to be quite focused on that for now.
How are you spending most of your time these days? Are you spending mostly on product, sales, growth, marketing? What are you doing to split your time?
So I would say over the past 4 months or so, at least 70% of my time has been spent on fundraising. And I think that's fortunately wrapping up, and I'll be probably keeping just 20% of my time on fundraising, and the other 80% will be going back to, say, team building, growing the team, putting in the processes, and growing the business basically. So I think it's about time to. It's always that back and forth, right? So once you have enough money, then you kind of go and build a business again, and then when you kind of need more, then you kind of switch back. So I think it's kind of that transition period for us right now.
Maybe in the future, if you're raising again, you could give a syndication of our friends a small little allocation, a little tasty taste.
Of course.
And so, with that in mind, you talked about fundraising. You spend a lot of time on it. How are you thinking about the current environment? And you were a VC for a long time, so you probably know this really well. Do you think, especially in emerging markets, that you should be raising way more money than you probably need because the funding is available, and having a capital moat in the short term is an advantage for emerging markets? Would you agree with that or no?
It's a very dynamic question. So let me try to break it down. I would say a principle that we follow is that treat capital as food and not air. So in each meal that you eat, if you eat too much, you're gonna throw up. You're gonna feel bad. So I would say in general, know how much you're able to absorb, rest a bit, and then have another meal. But depending on the naturally depending on the market and momentum and industry and need for the model for capital, you need to adjust accordingly. In general, fintech companies, you have to be quite well capitalized, but that can come from equity, can come from debt. You don't have to raise only equity capital. And you can try to get more debt capital. So it's a balance between the debt and equity that you're gonna think about as a fintech in general. In terms of the momentum, that's also true. That if you think the market's hot and there are a lot of investors are chasing after this model, then you do want to make sure that you are participating in, if possible, right? If it makes sense. So I would say think about these three dynamics, right? Like one is how much capital or food do you really need, equity capital, I mean, at this stage. How much capital do you need for your business? The momentum of the market. So if you can kind of balance these three out, then you should have a pretty good idea on whether you should be spending more time on fundraising or not. And bear in mind that whenever you're spending time on fundraising, you're not spending time on building a business. And ultimately, you can raise successfully primarily because your business is doing well. So if you spend too much time fundraising, you actually end up giving up the opportunity to build your business. So that's definitely a very tricky and very difficult balance for a lot of founders.
Yeah, I mean, implicitly, fundraising is milestone management. Whether it's set or not, or baked into an actual terms. But if you don't hit certain kind of growth and you spend most of your time fundraising and you didn't actually grow your business, you put an even harder time crunch on you, where you probably end up spending capital inefficiently to kind of like catch up for the time you weren't building. So yeah, definitely a tough dance to imagine.
Right. So one little trick is you can always experiment, speak to a few investors that you are close to. See what they think about your model at their stage, about your growth, about the market. If they think it's pretty solid, then probably makes sense for you to spend more time doing that. But if you've spoken to like 10, 20 investors and most of them are being very, very say slow or very, very cautious, then it probably means that it's a little difficult given what you have right now. You may want to spend more time building a business before you head back to the market again. So I would say it's quite important for all entrepreneurs to really know where is the impact for every action that you take. You can, if you're blindly building a business or blindly fundraising without being cognizant of the actual impact and the potential loss of whatever you're doing, then it's very easy to fall into that trap where you you're at a different place at different time, at the wrong place at the wrong time. I think it's definitely a very tough dance. But the better you're at it, the more I think the more comfortable you can be with your business building.
I mean, anecdotally though, I've been seeing more founders more than not kind of putting them in situations where they're trying to raise more money without the clarity, right? And it sounds like what you're saying is very fundamental, right? It's almost like a YC Bible, get the value, make sure you know what you're doing. Then if it makes sense, you go for the raise, the macro conditions are right. But in these days, right, especially when you were a VC, like how much noise were you seeing, or how much money did you actually deploy where it was this kind of situations where there wasn't that clarity and they were just raising too much that they shouldn't have?
I don't think there's going to be a perfect answer for this. I think what's too much is the definition of too much is difficult to come up with, right? So I'll come back to those points that I mentioned earlier. Know how much you need, know the market momentum, and think about how much time you're giving up building a business when you're fundraising. If someone's offering a check on the spot and you don't have to do much work, then that probably makes sense, right? As long as the valuation and all the terms are good, right? But then if you have to work really hard for it and go through 6 months DD to please that investor who may eventually not invest, that's a pretty big gamble, I would say. So I would say move forward with a bit of test and kind of see how where we stand.
You got to know your odds. You got to know the context. I mean, I guess I see your point. Why it's not an easy answer. It's very polished and diplomatic. You could see all the years of VC and being a founder has given you ability to answer very cleverly. But I think it does make sense. The last thing about Karbon Card, then I kind of want to pick your brain at is how are you thinking about developing the product cycles? How do you think about shipping, and how do you think about engineering?
Is there a particular, say, area that you want me to kind of share my views, or is it more like how do I think about building a team? How do I think about building a product? How do I think about
building a product? I'd say more so, because I mean, what product encompasses your ability to put the design and the engineering together in an efficient kind of way across teams, right? And we know, like, for example, in Silicon Valley, Bibles will say, like shipping fast is very important. Being able to ship, and have that loop where you, listen to your users and actually feedback to actually manifest the value. Because a lot of times, I'd argue Southeast Asia still, and I don't know about South Asia, India, this kind of product person is very hard to find. Like someone who really understands, like the theory, the philosophy, and execution, and to pull it off very well. Like for me, one of my favorite products would be using Descript, which I use to edit all the software, and they literally ship every day. Every time I open up the software, it's just something new. And it's actually, it just adds value every time, So I'm kind of wondering, especially being a YC company now, but coming from a rocket background and coming from developing markets and being a VC in Asia, how do you think about that? Where have you landed on your philosophy?
So before I answer that, let me ask you a question. Do you know why it's difficult to find good product guys?
You're talking specifically for this region, or I guess it would be the same everywhere, right? It's hard to walk between worlds, so that already makes it harder for people to speak the different languages of the intersect, and it's just a hard problem to solve. To be a great product person is why I focus on a lot on that these days. Just develop those skills.
It's true.
I don't have
another way to think about it is that when these product guys are so good, they start their own business.
So yeah, exactly, yeah. So if you're a very good product person,
you're so good at understanding the market, understanding the product, building the product, building the team,
Yeah.
and fixing the problems. Like, hey, I can do this myself. Why don't I just do it somewhere on right? So that's
Yeah. Is that
well,
what
no,
happened with you?
not necessarily, but I'm just saying that in general, it is quite hard to find a solid product guy globally, not just South Asia, but US.
Yeah, globally.
And especially if the markets are, environments are conducive for first-time entrepreneurs, it's difficult. It's a temptation that's difficult to resist.
Right. Well, I mean, I was just going to say the last thing is like there are some tailwinds with the amount of money going from LPs into VCs into the region. What we've been doing for the past 10, 15 years, 20 years maybe for you. But I think we're at a point where there is more talent.
I agree.
Like for example, if you're sitting in Silicon Valley, it's already way better than here. But we're at a point where it's somewhat better.
It's always a spectrum, right? There are some markets that funds only want to back established companies and not first-time founders because they may not see that you're able to make it happen, make it work, right? So I would say it's a spectrum. And I think coming back to the question about like I said, product the philosophy, in general, there's so many things here. But I think and I'll just kind of share my 2 cents based on the past 2-3 years of building Karbon. I would say number one is know your core product and stick to it. Don't try to do too much because they end up all being mediocre and they don't go anywhere anyway. So know your core product, have patience, and build it out. That's one. Number two, when you want to try out build a new feature, figure out a way to quickly test and see if it's feasible or if it adds value. Don't be so keen to build it out entirely, because that oftentimes when you build out entirely like that, it will not be used and you will end up wasting a lot of time. So let's say if you can break down your entire new feature into 3 components. The first component of just getting users to try it is not when you build that and the users don't even try it, then there may not be enough validation for the step components 2 and 3. So because many people always say, people think that if I don't build out components 2 and 3, then of course people don't try it. So then they say, okay, I gotta build it out. Sure, but that's a gamble you take. You have to realize that if you do build out components 2 and 3, and no one uses it, you lose a lot more. So you are able to build out part of the product with component 1, and that is enough for you to build some validation internally for components 2 and 3. Then you should do that, and not be so worried about shipping a perfect product that ends up being shelved.
Product gets even more nebulous than that, right? So if say you have your 3 components you're thinking about, and you're saying you're going to build the first component, how do you even, what's your process of coming about for even thinking about the first component itself? How do you know that's right?
Just think about usually the touch points with the customers. The first touch point would be component 1. Would they even sign up? Let's say, okay, that's the thing about onboarding. Would they even click on this link and say they're interested in signing up? Would they even do that after you build out the right demo and all that, right? If they don't even click in, then why build component 2, which is, say, the feature, right?
Yeah, right.
And if they don't have try the feature, then why build other additional things on top of the feature, right? So just think about the user journey and start with the first step of how to get the user to show you that they want this, or at least they're interested. And with that, then you can start kind of play around with it by calling these customers up and say, hey, you express interest to try this product. can understand your needs, so on and so forth. So again, I think it's I don't think it's necessarily under the model of ship fast, but I think it's more about thinking more clearly about how you can break things down into chunks that you can test out to build some quick wins and quick validation, and then build on top of that. Because the moment you ship the first part, the let's say component 1, you're able to get a lot of feedback on how your component 2 should look like, so on and so forth. So I think that would save you a lot of time in product development.
Yeah. Well, what you're alluding to is, and I think most new founders fall into this trap, is they think about a logical solution to the problem of how they would do it. And then sometimes they're not really the customer themselves. And so they'll test the first component of how they think it logically works, but then they iterate from the wrong base already. Right. So then you get into the trap of not creating the value. And what any founder I advise or that I invest in or talk with, like, the first thing I say is just make sure you're talking to your customers. Like, know the first touch point, know the journey first, but by actually interacting with them and knowing what you're trying to solve, not necessarily what they're telling you, right? But like, by looking at the behavior, like doing the actual design work, doing the actual user, research work before you start building it, right? It's just what happens is you also meet a lot of engineers who are very technically competent, but they think about it in a very logical way of how it should be done logically, but it's not how the user would ever do it. Right? So I think that's, you're alluding to much further, deeper work, and I think very good advice overall.
I think those are very good points. And I think a side point to this is that a lot of people assume that users are like them, or the pain points that they feel, they would say that that's what users want. And I know from my own experience that customers want this, and that becomes, I think it's because that's how we as individuals or human beings have been learning since childhood, is that we reflect, we make ourselves a center and say, because I want this, therefore I know you want it. And I think that could be a pretty fatal, I would say, characteristic for an entire company, because the resources that you drain just because you believe something is so and so, but not necessarily the customers or not necessarily the market. Yeah. Then it's very it's very tough, I would say, if that happens. But it's hard, it's difficult to kind of like take yourself out of your own view and do this.
The only last point I would have contention with what you said is it's not so much about how fast you ship, because that depends on the context, right? So if now that you're in the market, you raised YC, you made a splash in the market, I'm sure everyone, especially India, it's a hot market, everyone's looking at you now. What's going to happen is it's going to invite competition. Right, so I would argue at some point in time, unless you tell me speed doesn't matter and you have a better edge in another way, shipping fast, but with the clarity is important, right? I mean, at the end of the day, if someone raises way more money than you, they can move faster than you. Even with product does matter, but if it's good enough where they're hitting the core pain point, just enough, and they could outspend you.
Of course. I think if you're shipping fast with clarity, that means you've thought it through. And you're gonna hit the real as a user need when you launch. So of course that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's got to put the two together. So let's move on to the next section. I want to talk about VC and being a VC in Asia. You were early on, 2006 to 2010, Kleiner Perkins, and then much later on, after many waves, right? You became a VC again, a GP in 01 VC from 2016 to 2019. How do you think about being a VC in Asia? Like what makes a good VC for the Asia region?
For the Asia region, right? Not just for...
is there no difference? A good VC is a good VC everywhere, or do you need to know something different for different regions? There are different mindsets and philosophies, right?
I think we have to kind of narrow the scope a little bit. I think in terms of, in general, an investor needs to be good at three things. One is deal sourcing. Two is execution, so going through the due diligence and all that, writing the papers. And number three is portfolio management.
Yeah.
So, and that's true for VCs, that's true for private equity as well. So if let's say you can do all three, you're going to be a superstar anywhere you go. If you can do 2 out of 3, you'll be okay.
Okay.
If you can only do one well, you may not be able to survive. So you always want to aim for at least 2 of those skill sets under your pocket. Now, if you think about this question with this context, let's say you were a great investor in Malaysia because you can add value to them in Malaysia, and that's because you know the Malaysian market well. Assume that you have to invest in a Thai startup. You may not be able to add as much value to the Thai startup.
Correct.
So on and so forth, right? So depending on, but maybe there are some aspects that can still advise them quite well, because the model that a Thai startup is going after is something that you're familiar with, and you can share your view with them on that, so on and so forth, right? So I think to answer the question, it would be more like, are you able to add value on, or are you able to do all three decently well? So I think it's a pretty great.
It's a universal thing you're saying. So being a VC, no matter where you are, probably falls into these categories, and the region doesn't matter so much. So it means that I could transplant some guy from San Francisco, as long as he could do all three well, should be doing fine in Asia.
To some extent, yes, but it's not easy, I would say, because the markets are so different. The diligence that you do in the US is very different from you do in China, and all that. Right? So yes, theoretically, you're right that if you can do all three well anywhere you go, then of course you'll be a superstar. But that's not very practical. It's not very easy.
So let's do a little exercise, and say if you're you quit, say you exit Carbon Card and you have too much money, and you become a single GP. What would your thesis and strategy be to invest in the Asia region?
Meaning, if I raise my own fund and or invest my own money, what would be my?
Well, it's a good question. How would you structure it? Would you take LP money, or would you use your own money? But you're a single GP, I guess. And how would you go about doing this? What would be your thesis, and what's your strategy to invest and deploy your capital?
I would start with your former question and come back to this one. I think because once you set the thesis of how you want to invest, then it's easier for you to think about what's a structure that's suitable for that. I think I think the thing about investing is
why specifically proven models? Because some of the best companies we see today, in terms of $200 billion market cap and bigger, were ideas that were just not very clear back then. Or they didn't know how big it was going to get. They thought it was going to be great, but it wasn't too sure, right? So why this proven model line? It sounds very very safe.
It does, and I think it's all about the comfort level, right?
Okay. So personal.
So you have to go
and
chase like 1,000 unproven models. It might drive me crazy. Like how do I think about this? How do I think about that? I think there are too many variables and unknowns that I'm not comfortable with.
Well, but if you're doing seed stage, right? So you're alluding to I don't like to say, but spray and pray model, right? And the 500 model has worked out extremely well. And if you look at YC at scale, I think you were probably in the batch where they announced the headline of 347 startups in the last cohort, right? YC at scale is starting to look like 500 too. And I think what YC is probably realizing is that if they want to go global and have impact, they kind of need to do at the level of 500, but albeit they have maybe better branding. For the current portfolio, they have better returns or whatever. But it just seems like why not just take the risk and just spread more bets? And it's just like we're in a bull market cycle. You're going to hit a unicorn for sure if you do enough of it.
I think you need to have a pretty strong brand and machine to be able to spread and pray well. And the assumption I was operating under the assumption that I'm not a YC brand. I'm not able to attract all the top seed companies for me to take a look at first. And so I was under the assumption that I would have to go out and find them. That's why I mentioned, scout.
Yeah, correct. Okay, fair enough. And that's how YC started. I guess 500 didn't start that way. They just kind of kicked the door open and started spraying everywhere, right?
I'm not so sure, actually.
Okay.
I think every investment thesis or style has its reason. Some are stronger than others. Sometimes the weak ones end up, and the ones with weak reasons end up being more successful because they hit a home run, so on and so forth. Right? So it's difficult. It's difficult to say what makes the most sense. The timing is very, very important when you are looking at a particular market. For instance, if you're investing in AI 10 years ago, you'd be too early. If you invest in AI 5 years from now, you're probably too late. So you gotta be there at the right time, right? So how I think about my thesis, if I have to go back to investing, is that I'll probably pick an area that I'm comfortable and familiar with. That'll probably be fintech.
Okay.
So if I pick fintech and I want to invest across, let's just say, the regions in Asia, right? China, Southeast Asia, in India.
Yeah.
I would think about what is the say stage of startups. I mean, that I feel most comfortable with, and I see the most, and that I'm most capable of as well. So, and that naturally becomes the timing when you, let's say, so you're saying as of today, right? If I were to start investing, right?
Yeah, as of today.
Great. Yeah. So if I'm able to have great contacts like yourself, like others in the region, that can be a good scout for these deals, and that's also necessary, right? So I would say those are the kind of key elements of how I would think about investing in the region.
Fair enough. And to maybe for the Asia region, you could name 1, 2, or 3. Who do you respect the most out of all the VCs in Asia? Maybe in terms of performance, or founder friendly, or you just feel they're just good brand. Who would you pick and why?
Asia, right? Like entire region, or Southeast Asia?
Yeah, Asia. I mean, if you could say, you could also say I don't like any of these. I prefer to get money from somewhere else. Feel free to say whatever.
I'll probably lean towards early stage, like seed, pre-seed, fintech startups across the region.
Okay.
And I'll probably back those ones that are currently quite are a lot of models that's successful in China and US are being played out in these regions. So if you're able to identify startups in that space that are not yet booming, then you have a good chance of investing in a unicorn. So again, I'll say fintech, I'll say pre-seed, or seed, pre-seed, pre-A, and models that are probably proven elsewhere, say US or China.
Okay.
Yeah, and know my own limitations about am able to get exposed to these deals, or by the time I get there to. I think it's the typical suspects, right? But these top tier funds put you through a pretty excruciating process of due diligence and have a high chance of investing. So, in terms of if you succeed in getting the money from them, then yeah, they'll be great help and all that, right? With hiring, with future rounds, so on and so forth. But then if you fail, and you spend a lot of time in the process, then that's a pretty big loss, I would say. So again, I think it's a balance, right? It's not as singular of just saying I want this brand on my cap table. It's more about for you to get that brand on your cap table. Are you willing to sacrifice and maybe and eventually end up not having them and wasting a lot of time? And so that's one thing.
Okay.
Another thing is you also want to know who are the ones that will actually bring a lot of value. And when I mean value is a very vague term again, but in terms of what you really need from them, is it the capital? Is it a global perspective?
Correct.
Is their portfolios or XYZ, right? So if you're very clear when you're fundraising with exactly what you want or exactly what will add value to your company, then based on that, you should optimize for that. So for instance, if I only want capital, I don't care about anything else, then the brand of the fund doesn't matter. Whoever invests fast and invests a large amounts quickly, right? That's what you want. Yeah,
with good terms too, though. Yeah. With good terms, you don't want weird terms either. Right?
So basically, if you're only looking for capital, then yes, that's a kind of that's what you optimize for it. If you want some capital, but you want more, you want them to help you open more doors to potential customers, then you got to say who are your customers and why would this fund have access to these customers? Then you optimize for that, or something, right? So basically, I would say that if I would kind of flip that question as to who I think are the best funds in the region, to know what you want from the investors, and based on what you want, find the best investors that can bring you that, and that naturally is very different for different startups.
Yeah, and I know you're transitioning to growing the business with the current round you already did. But say in the future, if you hit your milestones and the traction is good, who are the names that helps you best now? Then, who do you want on the cap table?
Naturally, funds that can connect me to a lot of Indian companies because they help me grow the business. Funds that have access to say debt capital that can help there. Funds that know other corporate card or say fintech models globally, that can shed some light on how they have evolved in their respective countries. I would say these are the types of investors that would create the most value for Karbon.
Yeah. So after being a VC for about 7 years across different times and maybe a founder for many years as well, it seems that you moving to build Karbon Card is a signal, right? Is it better to be a founder now versus an investor? Is that why you did this?
So basically, the choice between doing a startup versus investing, right?
Yeah, of course. Is there a third option?
I think I do enjoy, and again, it kind of comes back to a personal preference again. I think it's very hard to speak for others. But I do derive more joy from building a company than to invest in building a great company than to invest in a great company. Because the sense of satisfaction actually is very different because you had to go through all the ups and downs just to get to where you are, and naturally when you are able to celebrate the sense of I would say accomplishments or the pride is off the charts. So I do feel more driven and naturally more joyous when these moments arrive. Now, in terms of the timing, generally don't think there's too much of a difference in terms of timing. Um, the industries are evolving. Black swan events are happening. The ecosystems are maturing. So whether you want to be an investor, whether you want to start your own business, I don't think timing is too much of an issue. Now, of course, the timing for the market, the model that you want to go up after, that matters, right?
Yeah,
but then just say timing of becoming an entrepreneur or investor, that may not matter as much. So it's quite different. A very personal example.
Personal, yeah. I mean, it's personal, but at the same time, of course, the fulfillment part is one aspect, but also which one would you be better at? And I think some people have certain skills, or they're wired in certain ways where one would be more optimal than the other. Some may be able to take the stress of one or the other. Some maybe deal with more of the stuff, the more mundane stuff. And both jobs probably have a lot of mundane stuff, but some people may have better preferences either way. So I guess you're right. It really just depends. And you're right. I think the timing is not so much of an issue, but if you think you're going to win better in one area, maybe focus on that one where you could win. With that in mind, then, what were some of the best things of being a VC, and what were some of the worst things?
I'll just compare it, let's say, between an investor and let's say a founder. I think doing the pros of doing VC or investing is that it's quite stable. You don't have to worry about not being able to pay your employees next month because running out of money. So that's a big upside. Another big upside is that you're exposed to so many awesome ideas all day long. That you're able to kind of be a receptor. That people come to you and you can go to them if they want to talk to you because they want to raise money. Yeah. So I think that's a pretty big upside if I were still in VC. I think the downside would generally be that the sense of gratification, like I explained, would not be as high if you do succeed, right? This is everything that's happened. When you hire the first person, when the first product was launched, your first customer, your first big failure, your first all that, right? And that kind of all comes back to you at different stages, and you feel, So I definitely think it's a big roller coaster. If you were to do a startup. Another drawback with investing is that you're not as deep in general with a particular vertical or market or a model, because you're spread so thin, and so you may not be able to understand a business or an industry as well as you should, or as well as you would like to, because you're spread so thin. Okay. Now, when you're focused on a certain, so it's kind of like that you, because you're so focused, you naturally know so much more, and you're deep into that industry. So I would say these are the two pros and cons of investor versus an entrepreneur.
It's a very interesting point. It's if you think about it, it's kind of like founder investor fit. So like it's good advice for an entrepreneur side when they're raising money. Just because someone said no, it's not really something's fundamentally wrong with you. It could just be that it's not a good fit, and maybe they're possibly spread too thin. It's just not for them. It doesn't mean they can't help you, connect you somewhere else, or help you later on, right? So it's just maybe one of these aspects.
Another way
it's
to
very
think
asymmetric.
About when people say no to your idea is that if you're starting something that's very different, then naturally 99% of the people will not be in favor of it. Because if you're starting something that people agree with and are aligned with, it's probably there already. You're not going to be that first one, probably, right?
Yep.
So it's actually only natural that when you start a business that people will say, no, it's not going to work. Otherwise, someone else have probably done it. So be prepared to hear no's. It's only natural.
Yeah. I mean, one of my favorite things I've heard about those types of no's is that they're the best kind of no's are like the somewhat uncomfortable no's. It's like no, but versus like a hard no, because like that means like they're probably chewing on it, and there's probably room for you to really explain what your secret is, right? Because ideally you have some insight that no one knows about, and that's why it's why people are saying no to it, because they don't know that insight yet. And it's just a matter of you can communicate that well and improve it over time with your MVP and traction, right? So,
it's an interesting way to embellish a no.
Yeah. It's important to understand that. It's like if you have the EQ and you could sense that type of no, you're like, okay, there's something possibly here that just Also, then you go look back and like, what did I not communicate, or is it really not a good match, or it's a good way to compass, right? To kind of look at it. My last question for the VC section then, and then before we could wrap up, is you spent time incubating businesses in Indonesia. How was that experience, and what did you learn from that?
It's been like rocket, but an elevated version, in the sense that the founders have maturity share, and you help them grow the business from 0 to 1. So it was pretty exciting. I enjoyed that thrill of starting something from scratch and seeing it grow. So even though I was in the driver's seats, but I actually spent a lot of time helping them on as many angles as I can.
Was it closer to a venture studio model, or how was it kind of structured?
I would say it's more like incubation. So basically, we will look for teams, look for models that are successful elsewhere, and kind of help them.
Import them. People who kind of do that, they kind of get sucked into the ecosystem. A lot of the successful guys in regional companies like Uber, Lazada, end up founding companies in Indonesia and staying there. But you chose India. Were you scarred there, or what happened? Like, why didn't you stay deep, dig in and be like, I'm going to go 100% Bahasa now?
When I thought about the Karbon Card model, I thought about Indonesia as well. But because of the limitations due to the banking industry, it wasn't feasible. So I didn't think there's a fit.
Okay. Well, what is your greatest lesson then from launching companies in Indonesia?
You mean like what did I wish I?
What's the takeaway? Yeah, there's got to be something.
I would say I was quite pleased that I felt that I was ahead of the curve, in the sense that I was able to identify a model that wasn't say popular or even not even existed, and then finding ways to make that happen and see it grow from there. So the idea of being ahead of the curve has always been quite pivotal in how I think about starting a business or investing in a company. In that you don't want to be starting a business when the wave is already at its peak. Most people do. When they see something so popular and so hot, then they jump in, whether it's stock investing or startups or investing. Everyone likes to chase after the peaks, right? I would say that's if you might be lucky and not get crushed, but I prefer trying to anticipate the wave and be there before the wave hits. And so if it does hit, then you'll be a big winner. If it doesn't hit, sure, that's something for you to learn. So I think I'm quite proud that I felt that I was able to kind of see what could happen, and a lot of them did end up doing quite well.
Yeah. it's just kind of ironic as a founder how you act versus as a VC. Because as a VC, you would pick the more proven models and a safer route. But as a founder, that sounds more risky, right? You're trying to do things that are not well known so that you are ahead of the curve. So you're taking a little bit more risk as a founder. So you have a higher risk profile as a founder versus a
For sure,
VC.
because all your eggs is in one basket, right? With an investor, as an investor, you invest in 10,
Correct.
20 portfolios, and if one fails, you're not gonna be like
portfolio management.
You may feel bad, but you may not lose sleep over it. But if you're doing a business and you're not able to pay your team salaries next month, that's pretty tough, right?
Yeah, that's a problem. But it almost seems you have found a good sweet spot, because there are comparables that have gotten quite big, like Brex, and you found a good niche that's huge, which is quite rare to find. A lot of times people they find a niche that's either too small or that's not viable, that doesn't expand to other markets. But it seems that like with this, the Indian market, it being a niche, it's going to work out to be quite well, and it's surprising that no one else has kind of solved it. So it seems like it's a good mix between the two of being proven, but also
that's why that's the reason why I pick Indonesia and India, because these markets are so big. So if something does succeed, you have an outsized outcome.
Yeah.
If you pick a smaller market, then
So earlier you gave me the response of expansion is always in the horizon, but if the time to strike iron is hot and you could raise a lot of capital, would you try to blitz scale it across the region sooner than later, or would you try to build a profitable machine first in India and then expand to like say another market like Southeast Asia? Because for sure, man, I think someone needs to solve this in Southeast Asia. It's just very painful to see all these poor SMEs not having access to credit.
I think I still believe what I said, that with COVID, if I'm not able to travel or understand the market and build a team there or all that, right? Then why chase after something that gives you pains, right? And instead of returns.
Correct. But for now, it doesn't seem like it. You're going to be focusing on dominating the India market, which is big enough, honestly. It probably could occupy you for the rest of your life, for all we know. And you'll be moving to India as soon as possible.
It depends on COVID, right? So before COVID, I actually spend most of my time in India, in Bangalore. So I think once it's over, we'll definitely be spending a lot more time there.
Well, yeah, you're the one who told me back in 2020 not to get my hopes up for 2021, which is so true. I still can't travel. I'm still stuck here. So that was very good advice to reset my mentality, thinking I could travel in 2021. So
I was just managing.
You were probably right.
So even when I turn out be wrong, you'd be like, you're happy, right? But
yeah, correct. I have you to thank for that. So I am not disappointed this year. Okay, Pei Fu, anything you want to plug, or how can people contact you or reach out to you?
No, I just thought it was pretty fun catching up. It's been a while, right? And it's kind of a format that you have here.
I mean, I know you're very busy, so I appreciate it. Congratulations on the success with the YC raise and going through the cohort. And I know you're going to kill it in India, man. And maybe the next time we meet in person, I'll be visiting your palace in India.
No. I think it's still a long way to go. But thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me on.
Still early days. Okay.
Thank you, Alex.
All right. Thanks for your time.
Hey, listeners. Thank you for listening to Pei Fu's episode. If you enjoyed the content or learned something new, please share this with your friends and family, or for anyone else who would benefit, and give us a review on your podcasting platform of choice. So what did we learn today? Upon listening to this episode again, there were so many nuances to grasp that I will have to follow up again. But what comes to top of mind is around Pei Fu's guiding principles, which feeds into his decision-making framework. Whether personal or professional, Pei Fu attacks problems and challenges in a similar manner. The foundation to all this is taking the time to have a few basic values and principles that you will always refer to over time. And as you go through life, what ultimately makes the most sense is when all stakeholders don't feel friction and the path forward is clear. In those moments, you keep going and take note of why and how it makes you feel in order to denote any values to incorporate into your guiding principles. The opposite is exactly true too. You know when you need to take another path when there's too much friction, and that friction forces you to re-examine those principles and to see if you need to tweak them to do something different if something similar happens again in the future. You can also tell that one of his guiding principles is to keep things as simple as possible for clarity. You see this in action when I purposely ask vague or broad questions, and he will break it down on a much deeper level so that a general principle can be derived, and thus answers the question as concisely as possible. It's a superpower to see beyond surface level questions, which allows him to answer questions very concisely. I imagine this is what really helps him grasp the big picture and to be able to execute on the minutiae that builds up that picture. This is a vastly underrated skill that most people don't possess and often need a whole team to make up for the shortcoming of this natural ability. Aside from the guiding principles, there was a lot of practical advice from being an investor in the startup world, from knowing your sphere of competence to building a thesis from that, and then ensuring that you're well versed in ideally 3 categories of either sourcing, investments, execution, and lastly, portfolio management. I hope you learned something new and see you guys back here for next week's episode.